Writing. One of the trickier parts of any exam. You have to produce language in a very controlled way. And you can't hide your mistakes like you might if you were just speaking. Spelling isn't important when you're speaking, but it's really important when you're writing. In this video and the next in these series, we're going to be looking at the Cambridge English Advanced exam and the writing paper there. We're going to look at each of the different parts of the writing paper and what you might have to do to get a pass. But before we do anything else, we need to look at this part of the exam from Cambridge's perspective. In other words, how is your writing marked? So let's think about the writing paper. There are two tasks, and the first task is always an essay. There's no getting around it. But this is a good thing. If you know what the first piece of writing is going to be, you can get really good at it. So that on the day, you don't really have to think too hard. You can walk into the exam, sit down, and write off a brilliant essay that would please any examiner. The second part is a little bit trickier, where you're given a selection to choose from. But these days, the process is a lot simpler. In the past, before Cambridge made their changes in 2015, there were so many different writing tasks that it was impossible to even know what all of them were, let alone be an expert in any of them. Now, there are only 4. You might have to write a letter. It could be formal to a boss or as a letter of recommendation to somebody, or it could be a letter to a friend giving them information about something. It could be a review, maybe of a film, a concert, or a book. Or it could be either a report or a proposal. And these are both formal pieces of writing. We're going to look at all 4 of these in future videos along with the essay. But today we're concentrating on the assessment, how Cambridge will mark your writing. So let's think first about the task and how long you've got. You've got an hour and a half in the writing paper, and on the face of it, it seems like a long time. But you'll have to work quickly. That's about 45 minutes per piece of writing. That includes the time you need to prepare what you're going to write, to plan it on a piece of paper, as I'm sure you will, and then to check your writing afterwards. And I tell my students that the best way to check their writing for simple mistakes is to not think about it for a little while after. Now obviously you can't just go home, forget about it, have a coffee, watch a movie, come back in a week and do the rest of the exam. But there is something you can do. You can write part 1, forget about it, put it out the way. Then write part 2, your mind is somewhere else. Then go back to part 1. Find those little mistakes, the spelling, the lower level grammar mistakes that everyone makes, and fix them. Then, suitably refreshed, go back to part 2 and do the very same yet again. You can do all of this in 90 minutes, I'm sure of it. You have to remember to keep an eye on the word count. You have to write between 220 and 260 words for each piece of writing. Now you can go over, and if you need to, I suppose you can go under, but I don't recommend it. The less you write, the less chance you have of getting higher marks. Don't go crazy though. Don't go and write 500 words about something, even if you really like the topic. Try to keep within 10% of the overall word count, and you'll be doing all right. I really don't recommend that you spend any time at all counting the number of words you wrote. It doesn't help anybody. It infuriates me when I see students going through and writing in pencil the number of words at the end of every paragraph. It's a waste of time. What are you going to do? You find you've gone 2 words over, so you remove a few articles. You needed those articles in the first place. The examiners are not going to read exactly how many words you've written either. They might count how many words are in one line and then multiply down, but they'll only do this if it looks like you've gone really far over the word limit. The best thing to do is to practice writing for the exam. Practice writing the right number of words, see how much space on the paper that takes up with your handwriting, and then just remember that. when you've done the exam. If it's about the same, it must be about the same number of words. And please make sure your handwriting is legible. There's nothing worse than reading somebody's writing when it looks like they were doing it on the bus. Now, sometimes my students have done their homework on the bus and you can tell. But how some people can do it in the exam, sitting at a desk, and it still looks like they were in the middle of a parachute jump when they were writing, it's beyond me. If your handwriting's not good, either practice it now or just write in block capitals from start to finish. Your handwriting is not going to give you more points for being beautiful because, let's face it, everyone writes on a computer these days. But it could lose you points if the examiner can't tell what you've written. Be especially careful if your handwriting makes it difficult to tell the difference between an R and a V. Happens all the time when I'm marking my homework. So let's look at the different criteria that Cambridge consider when they're giving you your grades. And they look at 4 areas. The first of those is content. Content is basically your task completion mark. Have you done what it says you have to do? And this means that you have to read the instructions, what we call the rubric, really carefully. Make sure that you know what is expected of you. Underline the content points. And in the future videos that I'm going to produce, I'll talk about the different content points that you'll expect to find in things like essays and reviews. So to get 5 marks out of 5 here, the top band, everything's out of 5 for Cambridge. To get 5 out of 5 for content, you just have to identify the content points and address them properly. A single sentence is not properly addressing anything. It will help you avoid missing the information entirely, but if you want to get those 5 points, you want to introduce the idea for the content point and expand on it with 1 or 2 nicely formulated sentences. A good way to remember, if you've done all the content points, is that the number of paragraphs in your writing should equal the number of content points. If they don't, you might have missed something. So read the rubric carefully. To get a band 5 for content, it says, in the official Cambridge mark scheme, all content is relevant to the task and the target reader is fully informed. Now I'm going to be talking a lot more about the target reader because it's really critical, especially when we look at the different kinds of writing. But I'll do that in the next set of videos when we look at each part of the writing. But let's come back to this first point. All content is relevant to the task. Now I've seen a lot of students who are really imaginative and they really take hold of a writing task and they just run with it. The problem is they run in the wrong direction. They start going off on a tangent. They talk about things that are not connected with the task at all. And that, as sure as anything else, is going to lose content points. You should look at that content mark and already imagine you've got 5 points in the bag, because there's really nothing that can stop you from getting it. Introduce the point, expand on it so that the reader is informed, and move on to the next. Job done. The next area that they look at, again giving a mark out of 5, is something called Communicative Achievement. And again, I'm going to read to you what you need to do for band 5. It says, for band 5, top marks, you have to produce a piece of writing that uses the conventions of the communicative task with sufficient flexibility to communicate complex ideas in an effective way, holding the target reader's attention with ease, fulfilling all communicative purposes. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's break it down. If you want to get the highest marks possible for communicative achievement, first of all, the piece of writing that you produce has to be the right kind of writing. If you write an essay and start by saying, "Dear Sir, Madam," well, already that's a letter. It's not the right kind of writing. And if you write a report or a proposal that looks like a review or again a letter, it's the wrong kind of thing. Likewise, if you're writing something that should be formal and you use informal register like you're writing to a friend, that's bad communicative achievement. You need to make sure that formal writing looks formal. So you don't use too many phrasal verbs, you use single verbs. You sometimes use the passive voice. You don't use the passive voice when you're talking to a friend. "Oh, look, drinks have been purchased for us. I've bought us some drinks, thank you." So you've got to remember these sort of things, and that's where the communicative achievement comes in. But let's also look at this one. You have to communicate complex ideas in an effective way. Now this is the CAE, let's not forget. It's not FCE. It's not going to be the everyday. This is C1 level stuff. So you're going to have to think beyond the obvious. If you're writing an essay about something and it's probably, it's Cambridge, it's probably about the environment, it's probably going to be something like that, try and push it a bit further. Don't just say, recycle things so that we don't destroy the environment. Try to think more creatively. Think about how you could explain it to somebody who is a climate change denialist. Imagine that you were trying to convince Donald Trump. Actually, maybe that's not a good idea because you do have to use good vocabulary, sophisticated vocabulary. All right. Imagine that you're trying to convince Jeremy Corbyn that being the Prime Minister of England is not a bad thing. Okay, maybe that's too difficult as well. They do ask a lot of you in these exams, don't they? Anyway, you've got to hold the reader's attention. That means different things in different kinds of writing. To hold the reader's attention in an essay, you have to be thought-provoking. To hold the reader's attention in a review, you have to be interesting and informative. And it's a bit like that. Again, we'll look in more detail later when we come to it. The next area, and one we can talk about a bit more here, is organisation. To get band 5, the highest marks, your text must be well organised, coherent, and using a variety of cohesive devices and organisational patterns with flexibility. What does that mean? It actually means a lot of stuff that, if you know this vocabulary, makes a lot of sense. Fortunately, I know this vocabulary because I've spent a lot of time reading these sort of things, so I can help you a little bit here. So what does it mean when we talk about it being coherent? Well, first of all, it means that it makes sense. Now, hopefully your writing will make sense. Hopefully you don't have to be a mind reader to read your mind and to know what you've written. Hopefully when you read your essay, let's say, it will make sense. The points will be clear. It should be that, if nothing else. But this is where the planning comes in as well. Because for it to be coherent, it needs to have a flow. It needs to be point after point after point. And you can do this by using the question paper as your planning resource. Box out the different parts of your writing. In each box, put one idea. And to come back to the content points, each box should have one piece of content. Introduce it, expand on it, say something interesting and clever, move on to the next. But it also needs to be cohesive. When we talk about things being cohesive, imagine we're talking about glue. When you write, you don't write isolated sentences. You write sentences that are connected to each other. You try to take one short sentence and another short sentence and put them together by using relative clauses, for example. Even linking words like but, and because count as cohesive devices, but you need to use different ones so that you can get that flexibility that they want for the highest levels. So think about how you can link your ideas together in the first paragraph, introducing the first content point, but then link that to the second one. The simplest way to do that is to start the first paragraph where you're producing your ideas, start it with the word firstly, then the next one, secondly. Within the paragraph, say but, because, moreover, furthermore, as a result, consequently. There are lots of linking words you can use in the paragraph. Then you go to the next one, you can refer back as well if you want to. But there is another thing that you can do if you're really keen to get those 5 points for organisation. Think about the way that your sentences are structured. Now, I'm always telling my students it should be subject, verb, object. I play football, for example. But you can't just do that all the time. There are other structures available to you. So let's take that, I like football, and think how we could change it. One sport that I like is football. It's grammatical and it shows flexibility of organisation. There are many sports that I like. Football is one of them. What I particularly enjoy is football. So we can think of different ways to structure our sentences. We can also think about varying sentence length. For example, you're writing a review. You want to catch somebody's attention. So you have a short sentence. This book is brilliant. Short. This book is brilliant. 4 words. But don't make the next sentence 4 words as well. I liked reading it. No. Make it much longer. So you've got that kind of balance between the short and the long. This book is brilliant. Of all the books that I've read in recent years, none has been as consistently interesting, as thought-provoking, and as overally magnificent. And okay, overally isn't a word, you'd have to improve that yourself. But you get the idea. Short sentences, long sentences. By varying sentence length, you've got flexibility. Now, you're probably wondering, hey, you said there were 4 areas to look at. You haven't said anything about grammar yet. Where's that? Well, language is the last area that we look at. It's the last criterion of assessment in the CAE. To use language to a high level for C1 is actually just the bare minimum. That will get you a pass. If you want band 5, you need to do these things, and we'll look at them individually. First, you have to use a range of vocabulary, including less common lexis, effectively and precisely. So, for example, instead of saying the same word over and over, think of different ways of saying it. So instead of saying I went to a concert, I went to a concert. The performance was brilliant. The sound produced by the band was consistently great. Something like that. Just don't repeat the word concert. But you also have to use things effectively and precisely. So if you go to a concert, you are a concert goer, you're a member of the audience, but I wouldn't say that you're a spectator. That's more something from a football match. So spectator, although it's a nice word and it's pretty high level, it's not right for the context, so it's not precise. And that's what they mean by using language precisely. Then they say, uses a wide range of simple and complex grammatical forms with full control, flexibility and sophistication. Sophistication is my favourite word. It's a lovely word, isn't it? Sophos. It's beautiful. So what does that mean? Well, you can't have every sentence with just present simple. But if you do have any present simple, you better watch third person singular. The S on the end of the verb. It catches a lot of people out because sometimes the noun is so complex, people forget it's singular and it's third person. So the verb that comes after it needs that S. It's a low-level mistake if you make it, so it's not even really for part 5, for the bands up at the top here. It's not connected with that. That's going to be going down towards band 1 if you're making that mistake all the time. Likewise with articles. If you make mistakes with articles, it's going to bring you down all this way. So what is it then? Well, instead of just presenting things as they are, present things as they are not. Change them using conditional structures. If it hadn't been for this, whatever. That's showing some nice flexibility and some range. Errors, if present, are related to less common words and structures or occur as slips. You won't get punished too much if you make 1 or 2 little mistakes, but it depends on the mistake. If it's a sort of mistake that stops somebody from understanding what they're reading, that's a bad thing. But if it's just that you were in a hurry, you're stressed because of the exam, the examiners will know that and they'll forgive you a little bit. So if you do make a mistake, it better be because you've got the third conditional a little bit wrong and not because you've forgotten how sentences are made. And that's it really. You know, it's an achievable task. Getting high marks in the writing shouldn't be beyond the average candidate for the CAE. If you're good enough to take the rest of the test, you should be looking at the writing and thinking, this is an opportunity for me to get even more marks. Maybe to make up for some little slips I had in the use of English part earlier. So remember all of that. But more importantly, think about the target reader. That's the central point. We're going to come back to that as we look at the different kinds of writing. So that will be in the next set of videos coming very soon. So until then, thanks very much. All the best.